Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, and it's good to see folks with us. So you all are the strong cohort that has stayed with us to the very end. As the weather has gotten warmer, our numbers for the 3 o'clock afternoon Eastern time session have gone down a little bit, and our numbers of people watching it during the week on the recording has gone up. So we're balancing out. So again, welcome everybody. This is our final session for the Advancing Nonviolence Studies Circles, and I'm Johnny Zakovich. I'm the Executive Director of Pax Christi USA, and it's really been my pleasure to be the moderator for these study circles as we've gone along. I am actually coming to y'all today from Florida, where I am on semi-vacation this week, but did not want to miss this, so I'm glad to be with all of y'all today. On today's call, during the panel discussion, as always, all participants will be muted with the exception of our moderator, myself, and the panelists. If you want, you can submit questions for the panelists in the chat function, and I'll try to get to some of those questions as we proceed. I also want to just let everybody know that today's event is being recorded and it will be posted later to watch on our YouTube channel as well as the website. So if you want to go back and look or you want to share with others, please refer to the website or the YouTube channel and you can see the panel discussion there. Since this is our concluding session for the study circle, we're going to be returning to the panelists from our first session, those who provided an introduction to and an overview of the book and the process that led to it. We'll be revisiting with them in a way that we hope brings to a close, but brings full circle the engagement that we've had with the book, while also opening up and talking about some new possibilities or next steps in what really is our continuing exploration of nonviolence. But before we start and before we hear from today's panel, we're going to watch the last in a series of videos which were produced by Pax Christi International for the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. And again, this features some of the voices and the faces of contributors and subjects from the book. Today's video is about 12 minutes long, and it's called Planning for Nonviolence. I'm going to go ahead and start that now.
Going inwards and looking at like, where are those places in myself that are where there's ruptures, is connected to our work in terms of addressing the current climate crisis. And Pope Francis has done, has been such a gift for us. There's so often in Laudato Si, he talks about how interconnected peace, justice, and creation care are. Like, there's just no way to separate them. And the line of like the interior deserts within are what's causing the desertification outside. That it's really because we're so disconnected from ourselves, we're creating that kind of violence against ourselves, that we're creating violence outside. And so this interior work of, whether through prayer or reflection, examine, is really critical to addressing the systemic issues of our time. And I think that, that was such a powerful message of Laudato Si, that our environmental crisis is actually a spiritual crisis. We can create, technological solutions, but in the end, we're not going to fully address it until we address what's at the core, which is kind of the ways that our hearts are broken or are hungry. And so nonviolence for me has provided some language around that.
Two questions coming out of the Rwanda genocide has really shaped my understanding and appreciation of the Bible. One was, at the height of the genocide, the Pope sent the head of the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity to Rwanda, and he asked the people gathered whether the blood of tribalism was deeper than the waters of baptism. For me, that is a haunting question. How come we Christians are readily able to kill one another in spite of the bonds of baptism. The second question was by a bishop that I met in Rwanda on one of my research trips, and I taken a group of students, and he was talking about the experience of genocide in his churches, how many of his parishioners actually participated in the killing. And then he turned to us and said, the most basic challenge for us Christians is, how do we form Christians who can say no to killing? For me, those are two haunting questions that have really, in a way, led me to see that from a Christian point of view, we need to pay more attention to what the story of God is, redeeming the world in non-violent ways. And that has made me carry on research in Eastern Africa, in parts of Africa, where I've discovered incredible stories, incredible people, incredible witnesses of this way of God, of this way of Christ, of this way of non-violence that has even led me deeper into that appreciation of non-violence.
I was 13 years old in 1981, where I witnessed myself the San Pedro Cathedral. It's a Catholic church in my city, in Davao City. I saw for my own eyes how it actually blew up. So this was after a mass that I attended, and when a passenger jeep was actually passing the front of the church, then I saw the bomb blew off. And so that to me was it's an image and a feeling, an experience that made me ask about why is this happening in Mindanao? Why is this that there is this acts of wanton violence that actually hurt people? And so that became for me an awakening. And I said, what can I do in this situation? What could be my own contribution in this process of creating an alternative? What are actually alternatives that I can do to actually move towards change in the context of Mindanao? So that has been where my journey has come from. And even until now, it's not a perfect context. We still have a lot of bombings that are happening, but this is also when, after incidents of violence, where you see a lot of people coming together. And I think that's precisely what nonviolence is, that it's not that when we experience violence, we also do violence to others. It's actually awakening in people, in individuals, in communities of what could be ways that we can actually stop this, and even to us, of course, transform this to a level where we see each other now as human beings. And I really hold to that it's precisely that it's really this process of reclaiming back the sacredness of humanity. And one mentor explained to me that in this work there is no monopoly of goodness. We are all good. And so even those who are actually on the other side of the fence, that we treat that other as an enemy or the perpetrator, they do have their own seed of goodness. So if we can touch on that, connect to that, and we'll be able to, that's part of that transformation that we need to do, and we are challenged to do, because it's not easy. It's easier to become angry, to lash out, to retaliate. It's easier to do that, but it takes a lot of love, maturity, and also care to be able to cross that bridge of like, I see the goodness in you, and that goodness in you is what connects me, my humanity to your humanity.
Till I pay a visit to one program CRS was running in Rwanda. And this program was a reconciliation program. And we were trying, that program, our colleagues in Rwanda was trying to rebuild people who were broken, who were psychologically broken during the genocide. And when I went there, during the meeting we had with a group of people, I there was a lady sitting not far from me who stand up, a whole lady who stand up and say that, my brother, I want to testify something to all of you. You see, me, I have become again a human being the day I decided to forgive this man sitting here. And this man is the one who is his friend. They killed my husband and my sons. And when he was released from the prison, I was suffering. I could not smile because any day I was thinking about revenge. Till the day, by going through a process led by Justice and Peace Commission, I decided to forgive him. And then I went to him at home and said that, I come to tell you that I forgive you. And the day I say that, I feel that something go out from me. All the bitterness I had in me went out. And I started again to think that something good could happen to me in life. So the fact that I went to him and just tell him that I forgave him was the started process of my personal healing. And the guys himself started up and say, myself, I knew I was not a human being till the day this lady came and decided that she's coming to forgive me. I did not believe in her. But time to time, she come back and say, I want you to become a human being again. And finally, himself say, I really regret everything I did. And today, this woman and myself, we are trying to show to others that we can still have hope to live together and to rebuild together. And this for me was one of the turning points in my way of viewing non-violence, the way I was explaining it. Because I discovered that non-violence is also a healing process. A healing process that brought me, even if as human being, every person, when you are frustrated, when you have gone through violence, you can be traumatized. You can have also negative response. But when you succeed to have a positive response, a response that keep you stay up as a human being, and also continue also to elevate the humanity of the person who violates your own dignity, this brings you to be healed yourself. And this gives you more life, more happiness life. And so this is one of the many experiences I have gone through during the workshop, during the meetings, that brought me to believe and really to fully believe that the best way of dealing with the various crises we have in the world is the non-violence way of doing it.
I feel it every time I pass through the checkpoint and the soldiers treat me in a bad way, and even my children. I think of this verse. I used to tell myself, I need to love them because they are created on God's image, but I need to hate and work and defend and do everything I can do in order to stop what they are doing in a bad way. I hate their actions. I cannot say I love their actions. I hate them, but I love every human being because they are created on God's image. And I think this is not easy, especially the way we are living. Every day I'm facing the soldiers or the wall or the checkpoint. Every time I have I feel that I'm really angry. I feel that I hate them. But if I don't really work on myself, I will hurt myself. So that's why I want to heal myself by looking for ways how to act, change my way of thinking, change my heart, and then to act. I cannot act if I don't have this faith.
We're grateful today to have back with us Marie Dennis, Eli McCarthy, and Judy Code. Marie Dennis was co-president of Pax Christi International from 2007 to 2019, and she is now a senior advisor to the Secretary General and serves on the executive committee of Pax Christi's Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Marie has been active in faith-based movements for social justice and peace for over 40 years, and she is the author or co-author of 7 books, editor of the award-winning Orbis book, Choosing Peace, The Catholic Church Returns to Gospel Nonviolence, and co-editor of our book that we're reading together, Advancing Nonviolence and Just Peace in the Church and the World. Eli McCarthy serves on the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative Global Steering Committee, and he chairs the CNI Global Education Committee. He's also a professor at Georgetown University in Justice and Peace Studies, with his recent book arising from the CNI conferences called A Just Peace Ethic Primer, Building Sustainable Peace and Breaking Cycles of Violence, available from Georgetown University Press. Eli is also the director of the DC Peace Team, which offers nonviolent skills training and deploys unarmed civilian protection units. Judy Code is a member of the staff of Pax Christi International and the coordinator of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. She served on the staff of the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns for 20 years and previously also served as the national chair of Pax Christi USA. She lives and works in the Columbia Heights neighborhood in Washington, D.C. So welcome back, Judy, Eli, and Marie, and thanks so much for being with us today again to help us bring full circle our study of advancing nonviolence. I want to start with a few questions for y'all from part 4 of the book, which is Embracing Nonviolence, but we're also going to touch on some of the information in the appendices, as well as look to you for some guidance around next steps that our participants in the study circles might take in pushing forward the agenda of the book, Advancing Nonviolence and Just Peace in the Church and in the World. And so this first question, I think I'm going to start with you, Marie, if that's okay. Sure. This part of the book seems to take all that we have read so far, and it provides a systemic approach, what the book calls a new moral framework, with nonviolence being the operative lens. The chapter opens with the assertion that the church's rich teaching on peace and nonviolence is obscured by a reactive approach to particular conflicts in which just war is at the center. So maybe, Marie, I'd ask you to just maybe start us off by fleshing that out a little bit more. What's the tension between the just war theory and an ethic built around nonviolence and just peace? And what's it mean in terms of the larger aspect of the church's teaching?
Great question, Johnny. I think the answer to that is both very simple and very complex. At a fundamental level, at least my experience has been that whatever is the crisis the world is facing, when we as Pax Christi have said, war is not the answer, don't go to war, what the response that we had been getting was, well, we look in our toolbox of preparations, and what we find is that the toolbox of war preparations is very full with all kinds of equipment and well-trained humans ready to fight. When we look in the toolbox of nonviolence, we were told, well, we don't see very much there, so we have to do something. Maybe this will be a just war. The very implication that a just war is possible is fundamentally the problem, and I think we all know that. It was stated very clearly in Fratelli Tutti, in Pope Francis' recent encyclical, in which he was gathering what has become a very frequently repeated insistence of the church and of many people of faith. So the implication that a just war is possible is leading us down a pathway of constantly feeling like we have to be prepared for a just war. And so all of our attention and all of our investments have gone into preparing for a war when we know that it isn't possible. So part of what we've been saying is we are not talking about not responding in crisis situations. We're talking about investing in learning, in teaching and embracing the very powerful tools of nonviolence at every level, at a personal level, at a interpersonal level, and very much at a social and political level. Nonviolence is a powerful tool for responding even in dangerous situations where conflict must be transformed. Yeah, and violence is simply not the answer. So what we've been saying is move away from talking about just war, put it on the shelf. There are lots of very legitimate arguments that it was a very bad idea from the beginning. But what we can do now is look at the situation now in our world and know that it's a bad idea. And so let's put it aside and look at what else we could be doing in order to resolve or transform the conflicts that we're facing, and so on and so forth. And I'll stop there because lots more to say, but I think just the point is it's a dead end direction, and we know that clearly, and we need to focus on nonviolent options, and we can.
Thanks, Marie. And I know that for the Pax Christi community, I mean, I've been involved with Pax Christi for just about 30 years now, and there's always been this sort of conversation about the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the impoverishment of just war theory in order to answer some of the big questions. And, you know, for us, it's been that tension between just war theory and a theology, a practice of nonviolence. And we've heard a lot in the book that has unpacked, you know, that the ideas around nonviolence for us. And here in this chapter, in many ways, what we feel is like the focus shift to unpacking the notion of a just peace. And Eli, maybe I could direct this specifically to you. As I mentioned in your bio, one of the books that you've recently edited or written has to do with this concept of just peace. So what are the key components of an ethic of just peace? Eli? And if you could make sure to unmute there, Eli.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you all. Thanks, Marie, for kind of starting to unpack this a little bit. So, yeah, the components of a just peace ethic are, you know, really trying to respond in a way to some of the limits that we've encountered with relying on a just war approach, but also really pointing us in the direction of, you know, how do we engage conflict constructively at the different levels that Marie talked about? How do we break these cycles of violence? So even when some wars seem just, for example, they still regularly get us stuck in cycles of violence. So that's the second key part. And then the third part is, how do we build a more sustainable peace? So when we think about just peace, you know, it is about sort of this respect for dignity in the natural world, preventing violence, and kind of transforming conflict through nonviolent strategies. And there's kind of three distinct spheres or categories, and each of those categories have a particular set of norms. So I'll share with you a link so you can kind of take a look at these as I just briefly enumerate them. But, you know, essentially our strategies and our actions that we choose are to either enhance or at least not obstruct these particular norms. So there's three categories. The first category is developing virtues and skills for constructively engaging conflict. And if you have that link opened up, you can kind of see that there's 5 norms that have been kind of arising here: sustaining spiritual disciplines, things like meditation and centering, as well as discernment and forgiveness, virtuous habits, particularly those that help us enhance nonviolence, like mercy and courage, humility, hospitality, education and training in key skills, such as needs-based analysis and root causes and intersectional analysis, participatory processes, forming nonviolent peacemaking communities. And then the second kind of area is breaking cycles of destructive conflict and violence. So these norms here are reflexivity, which is keeping our means and ends as consistent as possible sometimes. Rehumanization in the way that we talk about other persons or groups, the images, the stories we say and share about them. Conflict transformation, kind of getting to the root causes of a conflict. Acknowledging responsibility for harm. This includes things like restorative justice, for example. Nonviolent direct action, which would be your, nonviolent resistance movements, unarmed civilian protection, civilian-based defense. Integral disarmament is Pope Francis's kind of theme or idea about disarmament within ourselves as well as the weapons externally. And then the last area is building sustainable peace. So you've got 5 norms there, and those are, I think, pretty straightforward, from reconciliation, relationality, robust civil society, ecological justice, sustainability, economic, gender, and racial justice. So those are some of the main components. And if you look at that doc, there's a little more description about some of the advantages of a just peace ethic and how it, addresses some of the really important limits of just war in terms of how just war mostly gets used to justify rather than or limit war in our history. You mentioned the cycles of violence. It can enable structural violence and cultural violence as we prepare for and enable a community to get ready for those potential just wars. And it doesn't really form us well to be nonviolent peacemakers, whereas a just peace ethic is going to turn our attention to that work and that practice, and essentially, hopefully, closer to Jesus in the way of Christ.
Thanks, Eli. Yeah, and for folks that didn't get a chance to open that document, I'll make sure to send that link out or do an attachment and send it out to folks after our in our next our final communique after our study circles is over. One of the strongest points that I have found throughout the book is, while there's a lot there to unpack in terms of the analysis and in terms of the theology and the practicality, that there's always case studies that are sort of held up to demonstrate the various components of the book. And here, we've seen several case studies at the international level for how this new moral framework can be applied. My question would be is, what does the application of this new moral framework look like in a US context? And I'm thinking, for instance, of the insurrection that happened at the US Capitol in January, or especially in light of last week's verdict in the Chauvin trial. What are the efforts to transform or abolish the traditional institution of policing in the US? So again, how is the application of this new moral framework? Are there ways that you see it being applied here in the US? And Judy, if I could, since we haven't heard from you yet, I'm going to start with you on this one, but I'll give the other folks a chance to respond as well. Judy.
Yeah, just a little, that's a light question there, Johnny. Thanks, I appreciate that. The January 6th insurrection is a tough one, but I'm trusting that the systems that are in place at the moment will be able to respond appropriately, and that it will unfold the way it should in terms of a just response. I think one of the challenges that those of us in the United States are dealing with right now, and it might be the case in other locations too, is that we are faced with a large chunk of the population that it's very difficult to find a shared truth. So that is going to be a big challenge for all of us as we move forward, is just to agree on what the truth is. So in light of the Derek Chauvin verdict and just the ongoing conversation about policing, that is really going to be such a important and rich conversation in the next few years. Obviously, I think to look at one of the key components of Catholic social teaching, which is subsidiarity and bringing it down to a community level, is going to be very effective. I don't know if anybody on this Zoom meeting is in Minneapolis. I'm trusting in that case. I think that there's a very strong, vibrant, justice-oriented community in Minneapolis that is going to be working together to help that community heal and move forward. I'd like to share, there's a new resource from our friends with the Mennonites about defunding police and that conversation. And it seems like it might be a really useful tool that maybe some Pax Christi groups would like to engage with. So I'm going to put the link in the chat for that. Okay. So often the Mennonite teachings often are in synchronicity with what Pax Christi shares too. So.
Sounds good. Thank you, Judy. And Marie or Eli, would one of you guys want to answer that too? Again, what's the application of this new moral framework look like in a US context? Marie, if you can unmute yourself there.
The most frequently spoken words in the English language. All right. Just a couple of thoughts to add to what Judy said. Well, one is, I think that we need to reframe our understanding of violence. We have to understand, for example, that racism is a virulent form of violence. And I don't think we often make that connection. Second is that I think we need to learn to deal with trauma at every level, in all direction, that we have to recognize the impact of the long-term impact of traumatic experiences at both a causative level and a consequence level of violent encounters. I think we need to I think it's a wonderful that both they offer interesting the trial in Minneapolis and the invasion, if you will, of the Capitol, offer some really interesting lessons that we should look at carefully in terms of how do we deal with threats? How do we respond to our own experience of fear? There were examples in the Capitol of restraint, of people de-escalating what could have been an even more violent and disastrous situation. And we saw examples in Minneapolis and in many other places of authorities misusing power that was armed power. And I think sort of that whole package of experience should have us unpacking our way of understanding violence, of responding to violence, and of learning how to use nonviolent tools, even in dangerous situations. And I think lots to unpack there.
Thanks, Marie. Eli, did you want to say a word on this?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. This is a really important question, and we've got, I think, a really big opportunity, as a church and as folks here in the U.S. right now to really explore this. So first of all, the book Just Peace Ethic Primer actually has 4 domestic cases in it, including one on racism and kind of environmental justice. So that if you're interested in kind of applications there, you can find it in that particular book. In terms of the policing thing, like George Floyd's case is fascinating because Minneapolis, their police department was sort of billed as like a version of a model progressive department, right? They had community policing, they had implicit bias testing, they had de-escalation training, they were trying to reconcile with the affected communities, all that kind of stuff. And yet Floyd was murdered from that particular department. So, I think it really challenges us as Catholics to really think outside the box on this. And the Just Peace ethic, what that can offer is one of the norms is about a needs analysis. One of the particular nonviolent skills is a needs analysis. So when you think about policing, right, and if we think of it in terms of what needs is it trying to meet, like the needs for safety, protection, accountability, then we kind of build off trying to actually meet those needs. So the Catholic Church offers us the Eucharist, right, which is this experience and model of Jesus as someone who risks and offers his life without killing. And that is ultimately our authentic protection. It's what enables us to overcome death as we kind of enter into that. So if policing were to kind of move in the direction of focusing on saving every person's life, more so than either in enforcing laws or defending their own life if one is afraid, but the focus is really on saving everyone's life, then we start to better imagine what some other countries already have, where they have mostly unarmed police in Britain and New Zealand and Norway and so forth. We've got organizations that do unarmed civilian protection in our communities, such as Nonviolent Peace Force and Cure Violence, that works with credible messengers, and they're having increasing impact on contributing to safety in our community. So we could start to really advocate for that, scale that up, and develop those in our local communities. And there's so many cities right now who are developing these street response teams. Like in San Francisco, they're funding a van that has a paramedic, a behavioral health specialist, a social worker in the van, and they respond to certain 911 calls. And we could add in there maybe a de-escalator, right? Mm-hmm. Those kind of units can be set up in different cities to start to advance these creative nonviolent strategies of getting, meeting the needs of protection and safety. So I'll put a link here in the doc to a little broader reflection on alternative community safety that came out of the Shanti Sena network of groups that do unarmed protection. And you'll see that there's this sort of real short model of like invest in communities that are mostly marginalized and impacted by policing, train people in nonviolent skills, divert calls and deploy unarmed protection units, and scale up restorative justice is really a really short kind of way of thinking about how to create these alternative community protection mechanisms. So the link to that doc is in the chat box. You can also find it at the Shanti Sena webpage at the Meta Center, which we could set up. But those are a few thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Eli. I appreciate that. And Eli, I realize too that we're always cutting into your class time as well. So if at any point you need to leave us, we're grateful and thank you. I'm also grateful if you could stay around as long as possible as well. So I want to sort of cast us back a little bit. We've been reading the book, and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative came out of these original conferences in Rome starting in 2016. And at that very first conference in Rome, y'all published a document that has now been signed by thousands of church leaders, religious communities, and organizations. And it was sort of the first mobilizing action that came out of the conference. And it was called an appeal to the Catholic Church to recommit to the centrality of gospel nonviolence. So there's an outline of suggestions for integrating nonviolence throughout the Catholic Church in the part of the book that we just read. And I'm going to ask this question of each of you, and maybe Judy, I'll start with you. Where would you have the church start? What would you prioritize for making this a reality? Judy.
Gosh, I think that I actually, personally, I think education is key. And I do wish that the church, through its educational systems, would prioritize teaching nonviolence from the beginning, from a young age, and integrating it into their school systems. So that would be my vote.
Thanks, Judy. Marie.
Well, I have so many, my list is very long. I want the Pope Francis to write an encyclical on nonviolence because I think we need that. I think we need a clear exposition of the depth and breadth of nonviolence. But I also think, I agree with Judy about education very much, but I also think that the church needs to make sure that it is recognizing the violence within the church's own internal relationships, the way we treat each other. And so the violence of the radical violence of exclusion that's too often becomes our way of relating, especially to women, to LGBTQ and so on, anyone who's been on the margins. I think we need to look very carefully at the very old habit of internal violence and of power over relationships. So that's an internal task for the church.
Thanks, Marie. Eli, I see you still with us. How about you? Where would you have the church start? What's the priority for making nonviolence, a mainstream ethic, a central, aspect of the Catholic Church?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I also have a long list with Marie, so keep it short. Just to kind of connect with the last question, the just peace norm of racial justice is really critical, I think, for answering this question. And what it directs us to is not just kind of investing in communities that have been affected by policing, but I would say for Catholics to really join or create local coalitions that are working on alternative community protection. We've got a lot of momentum. There's a lot of groups involved in this. It's a great way to manifest gospel nonviolence, whether that's joining or creating a local peace team that offers nonviolent skill training and deploys UCP units. That's another way to do that work. And then, secondly, I would say it would be great if folks would be willing to meet with their bishops and talk about this book, Advancing Nonviolence and Just Peace. And if it seems to be a good fit, there's some momentum, asking your bishop to write a pastoral letter on active nonviolence and just peace. We've got a few sort of snippets of things like that, but we can get more of that. That can help, I think, move the broader as well. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Eli. Yeah, and that's a great idea, and that's a nice lead into our next question. And I'll also just shout out to people like Sherry Simon and Pax Christi Little Rock, who got Bishop Taylor to do a pastoral letter last year during the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action on nonviolence and just peace. And that's, again, a good lead in for us because, as participants in the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, all of us at Pax Christi USA are looking for ways, I think, to get our churches and our fellow Catholics to pray, study, and act on nonviolence and just peace. And so, we want to mention a few concrete ways as we bring the study circle to a close, that people can continue to be able to contribute, get involved in new opportunities, work on nonviolence, beyond these study circles. And I've got a couple of them, and I know some of y'all have been involved with them directly. So I'm going to ask you, Marie or Judy. I don't know I think Eli has left us for his class now. So we're down to Marie and Judy. But one of the things that we're pointing to and that we were active in last year around nonviolence was the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action, which is an annual event, just started this past year, but taking place each September. And Judy, I was wondering if you could just say a few more words about the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action, when it is, what are the kinds of things that might come out of that, knowing too, for folks on the call, that we will publicize and promote this through Pax Christi USA. So don't feel that you have to furiously copy down every word Judy says here. We'll get information up as it gets closer to the dates as well. Judy.
Thanks, Johnny. Yes, so the Nonviolence Days of Action came out of, we did have a subcommittee, the People of God, and it was a proposal that this could be a time, the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action extend from September 21st, which is the International Day of Peace, to October 2nd, which is the International Day of Nonviolence. And the intention is that it would also integrate with those are the days of creation. And it's just an opportunity for communities, groups to think creatively, do any number of activities or readings or to just discuss nonviolence and promote nonviolence in their local contexts. So last year we were pleased. We had put the word out, and several really interesting things were proposed in Flanders, in the northern part of Brussels. The Pax Christi Flanders, they had a bike tour, because they bike all the time anyway, but they biked around Flanders for nonviolence. Our friends in the Philippines, Pax Christi Philippines, has actually been doing nonviolence activities for quite a while. This is a long-standing activity for them. They have speakers, and they show films, and they have discussions. And so it's on the website, on the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative website, nonviolencejustpeace.net. And you can see a listing. I think it's easy enough to find the listing of the activities from 2020. And there are a couple of resources that were created by the People of God Committee, a list of just lots and lots and lots of options for groups to consider. So we hope that people will think about it and talk about it with their groups. And if you have any activities you want to do, if you either want to invite others to join you, or you just want to announce it, let us know it's happening, please send it to me, and we will promote it and let people know about it.
Thanks, Judy. And again, as I mentioned, Pax Christi USA is going to fully embrace those. It's going to be a major sort of 10 days of action for us as well. So we're going to come up with some creative ways that local groups and individuals can be involved. One of the things that we did last year during the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action was we gave folks the opportunity to take the vow of nonviolence, which has been an important ritual of Pax Christi members for a long time. And I know some people that have been participating in these study circles have asked about that. And as a community, we'll be dedicating a particular day during the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action when members around the nation can take that vow of nonviolence together. So be on the lookout for that. We're also going to be sponsoring, Pax Christi USA is having our national conference in July. And as part of that conference, we're having a special lead-in event that's going to be sponsored by the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, dealing with some of these questions around nonviolence, and more details on that will be coming soon. I did want to do a little bit of a plug here for an action that's coming up right away. This coming weekend, we're going to be sponsoring our first virtual nonviolence training. And I think everybody received a link and an invitation to it in the most recent communique that we sent out to all the participants in the study circles. But it's going to be a virtual nonviolence training done by the Meta Peace team. And we're going to have one of the participants, Mary Hannah, who's been real involved and said a couple words last time I think we were together about that, is one of the coordinators and trainers for that. And so if you want to register to get trained in nonviolence and to do bystander intervention in particular, we'll be having that opportunity with Meta Peace team. You can still register for Saturday, but we'll also be looking for other things that we'll be sponsoring over the course of the next year and other opportunities. So don't feel if you miss out on this one that there won't be another opportunity. And I thought Mary was going to be on the call today, but I think we are missing her. So I'll leave that as the plug for that. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is that we will start, we've heard from a couple folks, from Marie and from Judy and from Eli, about this intersection between racism and nonviolence. And our next set of study circles is going to be focused on the book, Birth of a Movement, Black Lives Matter and the Catholic Church. And so it's going to be connecting Black Lives Matter with Pax Christi USA's own charism of nonviolence. And you'll get an invitation in case you want to join that study circle as well. One of the last real concrete thing I wanted to point out to folks on the call too is that all of the resources that we've put out for these study circles, the panel discussions, the study guides, we're going to leave all of that stuff live on the website and even do a little bit of a reorganizing it. And what I would do is I would invite each of you to think about, either in your parish or with your local Pax Christi group if they didn't participate, or some group of friends, of mirroring these study circles in your own communities. And you can use all the resources that we've put together for this study circle so that it doesn't end with this meeting, but rather we hope, and we've heard already from a few groups, that plan to be doing this themselves at later times during the year. So know that all these resources would be out and it will still be up. And we really encourage you to think about pulling together 3 or 4 friends to read the book together, and for you to sort of act in a facilitator capacity to help unpack the book and just push the agenda and the message a little bit further. So all of this will be in the final communique and evaluation that we'll send out to y'all after the study circles are over with. But I wanted to just go back to one last question for our 2 remaining panelists, Marie and Judy. So in looking back at the first time that y'all were with us, I asked each of you at that first panel to tell us your hopes for the book, what you would like to see it lead to. And so I want to circle back to that and ask you to invite the people who have participated in these study circles, if there's one thing that you would invite them to do that could help move the church forward, move the church toward the hopes that you conceived in the writing and publishing of this book, what would that one thing you would invite them to do be? And if I could, I'd encourage you to be as concrete as possible. One thing you want to invite people to do now that these study circles are over with. And Judy, maybe I'll start with you if that's okay.
This is a hard one. It would be hard for me, but I challenge myself about this. Talk to the people in your life. Talk to your family members, talk to your neighbors, the members of your community about nonviolence. So just talk to people about it. That's what I hope people are able to do. Thanks,
Judy. And Marie.
Interesting, because sorry about the noise. I was going to say something very similar. Our hope when we put this book together was that we would help the Catholic community really understand violence and nonviolence at a very deep and wide level, that it would be something we would own, that we could easily understand and see where it needed to be applied. So I would say absolutely use the word nonviolence, talk about nonviolence, and don't let people pat you on the head and say, oh, that's really nice, but we live in a real world. Use nonviolence. And one example that I would give is actually I think it's an easy example. And it is, from the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si, for the whole last year, the church at a huge level all over the world has been encouraging every sector of the life of the church to lay out an action plan on implementing the vision of Laudato Si. We believe that that nonviolence is an essential component of a way of being that would actually accomplish what Pope Francis laid out in Laudato Si. So Judy mentioned it earlier, the connection to the days of creation in September. Look at every other action in which you're engaged and identify the ways in which nonviolent action is already contributing to the accomplishment of what you're trying to accomplish. The campaign, from Campaign Nonviolence to the Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action, to the season of creation, to the layout of what is now being called the Laudato Si action platform, it is filled with nonviolent action, with a need for nonviolent, an understanding of nonviolence as a personal conversion, as an effective tool in the world, and on, and yet the word almost never appears. So use the word nonviolence so that we can claim its full significance and meaning and importance.
Thanks so much, Marie. And I'm going to just bring Judy back up here too. We've got just maybe a minute or two left. If there is any last words that either of you would like to offer, or anything else that I haven't covered or asked you that you thought was important for folks to know, whether it's about the book or about ongoing work of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, I just wanted to give you an opportunity in case either of you want to say a word or two as we finish up this last panel discussion together. Judy or Marie?
Judy, you jump in.
I just want to say that I'm grateful that so many people have been engaged with this. This is very affirming that people have been interested in this topic and want to talk about it. And it's very heartening to have seen the engagement over the last few weeks. So I want to express my thanks to everybody for that. Secondly, that this is a long-term project, and but we are making a step forward every day, and I'm very grateful to be walking along with all of you. It's great. It's great to see so many old friends on this call. So thank you very much.
I would totally echo that. Thank you so much. The work that we're all doing, wherever it is equally important. So the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative is present in local communities, every place we can imagine it to be. It is also engaged in a pretty intense way with the institutional church, with the Vatican, with the Catholic universities, with bishops and bishops' conferences, with one we're not yet too involved with that we would like to be is with seminaries. Mm-hmm. But the work at a grassroots level is the heart of the matter. So I echo what Judy said. Thank you.
Great. Judy, Marie, thank you both so much. We'll give you a round of applause here. And again, thank you just so much for being with us and for the gift of the book and all the work with the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. We look forward to continuing this. And as I've said, these study circles really are sort of just an entry point really into the deeper work of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. And Pax Christi USA is planning on continuing, our fundamental charism is nonviolence, and this will be at the center of our work going forward too. So thanks so much, Judy and Marie.
Thanks, Johnny.